The shadow in the Obsidian Room. The Obsidian Room sat atop the Gold Coast like a crown of black glass. Inside, the air smelled of expensive sandalwood and the heavy silence of secrets. Thorne Valencia sat in the deepest corner of the VIP section, a place where the shadows felt like old friends. At 37, Thorne was a man of stone. His gray eyes missed nothing, and the faint scar on his cheek was a map of a life built on violence. For months, he had watched the silver-haired woman, Maggie, mop the floors. She was invisible to the millionaires, but to Thorne, she was the only honest thing in the building. He watched her calloused hands work with a dignity that his world of blood money lacked. He came here to stop being the boss and start being a ghost. But tonight, the ghost was about to be pulled back into the world of the Maggie Hartwell's heart was a drum of desperation as she approached the VIP table. She had seen Thorne's kindness in small ways, a generous tip, a hand offered when she slipped. She didn't know he owned the city, she only saw a man with lonely eyes. Falling to her knees, Maggie ignored the social barrier. "Sir, I'm begging you," she whispered, tears carving paths through her wrinkles. "Pretend to be my daughter's boyfriend for just one night. Save her from the man who wants to destroy her." She explained the ultimatum, the predatory lawyer Preston Whitmore. The gala, and the threat to Phoebe's job, the only thing keeping her brother Miles alive. Thorne looked at her scarred arms and saw his own mother's sacrifice. Against every rule of his cold empire, he spoke 2 words, one night. If you're enjoying this story, hit that like button, share it with someone who loves a good tale, and subscribe so you won't miss what happens next. Now, let's go back to how it all began. The night of the gala, a black Maybach pulled up to a crumbling apartment complex. Phoebe Hartwell stepped out in a borrowed blue dress, her amber eyes burning with a mix of fear and defiance. When she saw Thorne leaning against the car, tall, dangerous, and impossibly handsome, she felt the air leave her lungs. "I'm Thorne," he said, his voice a low velvet. "I'm the man your mother asked for help." As they drove toward the Peninsula Hotel, the silence between them wasn't awkward, it was electric. Thorne realized the photo he'd seen didn't capture her spirit. She wasn't just a victim to be saved, she was a warrior who had skipped meals and sleep for years. For the first time in 20 years. Thorne didn't want to play a role, he wanted to be the man the Peninsula Ballroom was a sea of gold and silk. Preston Whitmore III approached them with a smug grin, expecting to see Phoebe alone and broken. Instead, he met the steel-gray gaze of Thorne Valencia. The moment Thorne introduced himself as her boyfriend, the color drained from Preston's face. He knew who the Valencias were. He knew that Thorne didn't just win lawsuits, he ended lives, but as the night wore on, Preston's ego, fueled by whiskey, snapped. In front of the entire elite crowd, he shouted that Phoebe was a gold digger who had sold her body for the dress she wore. The room went cold. Phoebe's world tilted with humiliation. But before she could crumble, Thorne's hand was on her waist. He stepped toward Preston, his voice a whisper that carried the weight of a death sentence. "One more word, and I'll ensure you never speak again. I have the files on your past victims, Preston. One call, and you're finished." As Thorne led a shaking Phoebe out to the balcony, the dangerous man realized his life-changing promise was no longer just about one night. The morning after the gala, the sunlight felt different in the Hartwell apartment, sharper, yet filled with a strange, heavy quiet. Phoebe sat at the small kitchen table, her fingers tracing the rim of a coffee mug. She still felt the phantom weight of Thorne's suit jacket on her shoulders and the memory of his gray eyes looking at her as if she were the only person in the world. She was startled by the sound of her phone ringing. It was Nina, her voice a frantic, joyful scream. "Phoebe. Check the hospital portal. Someone just made an anonymous transfer of $300,000. Miles's surgery, it's paid, Phoebe." Every single cent. Phoebe's heart stopped. She didn't cry, she couldn't breathe. She knew instantly it wasn't a miracle from heaven, but a move from a man who lived in the shadows. $300,000, a number that had been a death sentence for her family, was apparently just a signature on a check for Thorne Valencia, while her mother, Maggie, wept with relief in the next room, Phoebe felt a cold wave of realization. She grabbed her coat and headed straight for the Gold Coast. She didn't go to the Obsidian Room, she went to the towering black skyscraper that housed Valencia Industries. When she bypassed the bewildered secretaries and burst into Thorne's office, she found him standing by a wall of glass, looking out over the city he owned. He didn't look like the boyfriend from the gala. He looked like a king in his counting house. "You paid it," she said, her voice trembling with a mix of gratitude and fury. "I told you I didn't want to owe anyone." "Why would you do that for a stranger?" Thorne turned, his face unreadable. "It's not a debt, Phoebe. It's a correction. Life was unfair to your brother, and I have the power to fix it." "Why should that bother you?" "Because I looked you up, Thorne," she shouted, her amber eyes flashing. "I know who you are. The Valencia family, the rumors of blood, the ghost of Chicago. You're a mafia boss. How can I take money that came from whatever you do?" Thorne stepped closer, his presence filling the room until the air felt thin. He didn't deny it. He didn't make excuses. He simply looked at her with a raw sincerity that bypassed her defenses. "I have spent my life surrounding myself with people who want my power or my death," he whispered, his hand reaching out but stopping just short of her cheek. "Your mother is the first person in 20 years who looked at me and saw a man instead of a monster. And you're the first person who made me want to be the man she sees." Phoebe looked at him, really looked at him, and saw the scar on his cheek and the loneliness in his eyes. She realized that while she had been fighting for her brother's life, Thorne had been fighting for his own soul. "The surgery is in 3 days, she said softly, her anger dissolving into a terrifying, new emotion. "If you're going to be a part of this, you're going to be there. Not as a boss. Not as a ghost. Just as Thorne." Thorne nodded, a faint, genuine smile breaking the ice of his expression. "I wouldn't be anywhere." The scent of sterile antiseptic was replaced by the familiar aroma of sandalwood and expensive whiskey. It had been 6 months since Miles's surgery, 6 months since Thorne had stood in that hospital waiting room, a silent guardian in a black suit, refusing to leave until the doctors announced the heart valve replacement was a success. But tonight, the Obsidian Room wasn't a place of cold business. It was a sanctuary. Thorne sat in his usual corner, but he wasn't alone. Beside him sat Phoebe, her amber eyes glowing under the dim gold lights. She was no longer the exhausted girl clearing tables at a diner, she had returned to her finance studies, her brilliance finally given room to breathe. On his other side sat Maggie, who no longer held a mop. Thorne had officially signed over the deed of the Obsidian Room to her. The mother in the shadows was now the respected proprietor of the Gold Coasts. The scent of sterile antiseptic was replaced by the familiar aroma of sandalwood and expensive whiskey. It had been 6 months since Miles's surgery, 6 months since Thorne had stood in that hospital waiting room, a silent guardian in a black suit, refusing to leave until the doctors announced the heart valve replacement was a success. But tonight, the Obsidian Room wasn't a place of cold business. It was a sanctuary. Thorne sat in his usual corner, but he wasn't alone. Beside him sat Phoebe, her amber eyes glowing under the dim gold lights. She was no longer the exhausted girl clearing tables at a diner, she had returned to her finance studies, her brilliance finally given room to breathe. On his other side sat Maggie, who no longer held a mop. Thorne had officially signed over the deed of the Obsidian Room to her. The mother in the shadows was now the respected proprietor of the Gold Coast's most exclusive lounge. "You didn't have to do all this, Thorne," Maggie said, her voice thick with emotion as she looked at the bustling bar. "The surgery was enough. You saved my son." Thorne reached across the table, his hand, the hand of a man who had built an empire through fear, settling gently over hers. "You gave me something worth more than any building, Maggie. You saw the man beneath the scar. You gave me back my soul." The peace of the evening was a stark contrast to the storm that had almost broken them. Preston Whitmore was gone, his reputation dismantled and his legal license revoked after Thorne's anonymous tips reached the right authorities. The shadows of the Valencia name still lingered, but Thorne had begun the long, quiet process of moving his assets into legitimate ventures, trading blood for business. Miles joined them, looking vibrant and healthy, his laughter a melody that seemed to chase away the last of the room's gloom. He shook Thorne's hand, not with fear, but with the genuine brotherhood of a young man who had been given a second chance at life. As the jazz music swelled, Thorne leaned closer to Phoebe. He took a small velvet box from his pocket and placed it on the walnut table. The diamond inside caught the interwoven bands of light, sparkling like a star. "I promised your mother I would help for one night," Thorne whispered, his gray eyes searching hers. "But if you'll have me, I'd like to spend the rest of my nights making sure you never have to be a warrior alone again." Phoebe didn't hesitate. She looked at the man who had been a dangerous stranger, a fake boyfriend, and finally, her family's savior. She realized that the dangerous man had become her safest harbor. Yes, she breathed, her voice a life-changing promise of its own. In the heart of Chicago, where the wealthy spent money like there was no tomorrow, for lives had been transformed. The boss had found his heart, the mother had found her peace, and the girl with amber eyes had finally found a love that didn't require a sacrifice. As the clock struck midnight, the Obsidian Room remained a world of secrets, but the greatest secret of all was that even in the darkest corners of the city, light could always